Hello everyone! Today, I'm going to be talking about the E-liter. Now, I'm gonna say this before I get too far into the video that I have two disclaimers right off the bat. First off, I generally hate talking about weapons like this or 52 because they are so unbelievably divisive that people will end up being very toxic about it. So I'm gonna state right away, discussion about this would be great. Any hostility would not be great. Please be kind and reasonable in the comments section and think about what you're writing properly. Please watch the entire video before making a comment about it. It's kind of basic YouTube etiquette, but I guess it has to be repeated here. Second off, E-liter is naturally a weapon I have a lot of history with when covering it. I have said a lot of negative about this weapon. I have said a lot in terms of reworking the weapon by giving it a burst bomb back and reducing the range a bit, or partial charges, or some crazy thing to make it play like a little more aggressive and a little less suppressive, or whatever it might be. I've had a ton of different ideas for them over the years. I am someone who's played a lot of weapons that have struggled into leader. I have also, since retiring, been put on an E-liter team. I am a coach for it. This is a weapon that I now have very high reason to be invested into, as it is a weapon on my team. Whether you look at it positive or negative here, I have some bias either for or against this weapon. And inevitably, a lot of my arguments might be boiled down to having bias either for or against it. Probably for it, given how this video is going to go. That said, I'm going to do my best to talk about it, and I hope the length of this video will show that I really did put a lot of thought into my opinion on this weapon. So, before we get too far into it, I want to talk about old E-liter. I want to talk about E-liter and its perception, because this is one of the few weapons that have been around in a strong or oppressive state for so long that the opinion on it is largely predetermined. In Splatoon 1, E-liter had damage up. It had 4 burst bombs. It had an instant location special. No matter what they did, this weapon was not going to be healthy in this game. It was overtuned from the very beginning to the very end. It's one of the main things that immediately solidified its reputation. In Splatoon 2, leader did get nerfed, but so did everything else. And so leader, even if mostly also Splatcharger, did see some use going into Splatoon 2. In addition to that, Splatoon 2 did some things that made these weapons more annoying. The most well-known is that they introduced a mechanic called main power-up. Main power-up, when it came to E-liter, was especially annoying. In addition to that, though, they added a respawn punisher. Respawn punisher increased the penalty upon death of your special saver loss and respawn time, as well as negated the effect of most of your quick respawn or special saver. This was more than likely done because when Splatoon 2 came out, quick respawn meta was a thing in Splatoon 1 that they wanted to avoid happening again, so this was probably a safety measure. That's a little bit fair, though nowadays, it's probably the most hated ability in the game, because surprise, people don't like being taken out of the game longer. It's just not typically very fun. However, when I go back to MPU, they did something that made E-liter especially stupid. So hello, we're here in Splatoon 2 now with a lot of MPU. This weapon got range with MPU, but also it got a lot of paint. And I mean a lot. Look at how wide this full charge is. And the top shots are also just equally ridiculous. I have to turn my camera to avoid having the paint over each other. Like, it just looks silly. It was so silly, in fact, that I ended up making a joke about this very thing in an early video.
Yo guys, so I'm trying out Splatoon 1 E-liter. I've seen a bunch of E-liter players said that they want to return to this weapon, but like, it's so bad. Look at this tap shot paint. It's just terrible compared to Splatoon 2's E-liter. Like, it's so bad at turfing. And you might say, oh, what about the partial charges? The partial charges don't paint either, and guess what? The full charges are even worse. Like, this paint is so terrible. And if you think that's bad, look at this wall paint. Like, how are you supposed to go up places to get to your sniper positions without your wall paint? Weird fucking weapon, dude. I don't know why you all were so obsessed with this thing.
Random story aside, this did not help leader's reputation, especially given that, until towards the end of the game's life, it had a 170p inkstorm. The other charger that was used, Splatcharger, as you can see, needed to be all the way up to 220p compared to the 200 it is in Splatoon 3, and it also got several paint nerfs to where its paint looked like this, because it was incredibly good at also spamming a special. So in Splatoon 2, while chargers weren't as broken as, being chargers, the sheer paint output as well as limited power of other weapons in the game made them equally annoying in this one. Then we moved to Splatoon 3. When Splatoon 3 was introduced, E-Leader also seemed equally annoying. This was during the time of crab meta. Leader was fighting with a bunch of crabs, a bunch of passive playstyles, and defensive play that Leader slotted into for its ability to snipe people before they got crab, or potentially snipe them in the crab. That was what made it good at the time. Respawn Punisher went completely through Tacticooler, and there was no ink armor to protect you, so E-Leader became an option that felt like it had incredibly limited counterplay. Tiny maps that are before the reworks that made them more tolerable, overall passive meta, and a weapon that thrived at sitting back and picking people off with even less tools to deal with it than you had in Splatoon 2. So to recap, E-Leader had a bad reputation for various valid reasons for 3 separate Splatoon games. Once Tacticooler became meta, Leader, and eventually Splat Charger, kind of fell off for a bit. Pretty much every Charger player was playing Pencil. Regular Charger and Leader were rare, and when they did show up, they didn't tend to do very well for the most part. So they kind of escaped discussion for about 2 years or so. That catches us up to modern day. Around 9 months ago or so, as Pen started getting its paint nerfs and tone backs to 220p, we've seen a few other weapons see play. Most notably, we've seen E-Leader start to get a rise in tournament usage. It has won Area Cup a few times, a few monthly challenges, and generally can consistently place in the top 4 within it. In fact, as of recording this video, we have another result from it very recently. I'm recording this as of the day we had Area Cup 54, a tournament that actually got won by the 4K E-Leader in Japan. And so, since Leader has become more common gradually, and people have figured out what to run with it more gradually, we have started to enter a point where Leader has entered the mainstream discourse again. And people are talking about if it is unhealthy, if it is ruining the game, if it's bad, like, for the game, the kind of general stuff, you know. People aren't really debating its viability anymore because at some point when you've won enough, that debate stops happening, really. But instead are talking about if it negatively impacts the health of the game. And I want to bring up one thing right away. Why did I spend a bunch of time talking about Leader's history? Well, it's because when a weapon has a certain reputation for a long time, it is really hard for that weapon to lose that reputation. In order for it to be seen differently, it has to take a really large hit. For example, Machine is a weapon a lot of people feel very sympathetic to because it got a 5-frame nerf. But if you go to before then, it was possibly the most hated AoE weapon in a very long time. It had a ridiculous amount of options. Leader has this problem, but on a whole other level. It's been really good in this game for a really long time. 3 separate games with multiple different points of usage, and throughout various different changes and iterations, it's had multiple things that have made it unhealthy to deal with. Because of that, inevitably, a lot of people's perception of E-Leader is shaped by that, and it can be jarring to change that. Dynamo's been another example of this effect recently, just in a different order. Dynamo has been seen as such garbage for so many years that it being a solid weapon again has gotten a lot of people talking about it, because people's initial perception of Dynamo is so wildly different than how the weapon is today. Now, my claim isn't going to be that Leader has a wildly different interpretation now, but I do think there are key differences in how E-Leader functions nowadays and how people think Leader functions. So I want to talk about this through the scale of 5 different things. These will be backline diversity and overall viability, a category that E-Leader is quite infamous for, since it's usually the backline that happens to bully a lot of other anchors, and is therefore seen as a problem for other backlines being viable. 2. Passive special spammy playstyles. Primarily in Splatoon 2, E-Leader encouraged passive compositions that spam specials quite a lot, as well as that option to deal with it. Does it still do that? Number 3. Weapon compositions. Does E-Leader encourage unhealthy or passive comps? Number 4. Weapon kits and special interactions. How does Leader interact with the other specials in the game, given again, this is a big problem in Splatoon 2? And does Leader's own weapon kit have problems with how it interacts with the rest of the game? And 5. How other weapons have to play around it. When you fight an E-Leader, does it have a noticeably unhealthy impact on the game? Now obviously, the take on all of these is going to be my opinion, but I'm going to try to present it in as best a way as I possibly can. So let's start with the category that I think will be the easiest to talk about. Backline diversity and overall viability. Backlines have been discussed quite a lot in Splatoon 3 as a problem, not because of E-liter, but because of pencil. So nowadays, people care a lot that the backline slot is pretty varied. So, let's do a quick head count. How many weapons in the past year have managed to win an Area Cup, the highest level tournament we usually see in the Japanese scene, which is the higher level scene of the two? The answer, depending on your definition, is 5 to 6. These weapons are Pencil, E-liter, Tri-Stringer, Rapid Blaster Pro, Heavy Smiling, and the odd one to count is Wellstring. Wellstring has technically won an Area Cup, but it was while being switched to Tri-Stringer for some maps. Wellstring was still used quite a lot of the time in top 4, so I'm inclined to say it counts, but if you want to be nitpicky, you can say that it doesn't count and there are only 5 weapons that have won recently. Still, 5 anchors is, admittedly, quite a lot of them. Most of these have won several times, such as Tri-Stringer, Pencil, and I'm pretty sure Rapid Blaster Pro has been there a bit, though it also might fall under the Wellstring case for multiple events. These are quite a lot of weapons that have won in the same environment E-liter has been good in. The data seems to point that E-liter is not denying other weapons from being picked in competitive play when it comes to the anchor slot. There are others that see use, and I believe this is for 2 main reasons. I think anchors in this game either fall into the category of having a lot of paint or other utility, or being focused on killing or helping other people kill. When we talk about these viable options, Rapid Blaster Pro and E-liter fall into the killing option. AoE is very powerful in this game. If you've been around the competitive scene for the past few years, you've heard people complain about it. Obviously, having long-distance, fast, and safe AoE is a very effective way to control space. So much that Nintendo's actually nerfed Rapid Pro recently, because it is that good at doing that. Liter is another one of those cases, but it's focused on solo killing. It has good matchups into every other backline, and is able to take them out, if directly contested, more times than not. However, other backlines are a little bit different. Pencil, Tri-Stringer, and Heavy Smiling get a lot more passive value. If E-liter is not directly interacting with these weapons, and same goes for Rapid Pro, these weapons are going to get more value passively. They're going to paint a lot more, get a lot more of their special weapons, and overall make it easier for the rest of their team to move around. These are weapons that make running certain things into composition a lot easier, because they can cover for a lot of flaws. E-liter and Rapid, on the other hand, are a little bit more picky with what they want, because they have extreme downsides, such as paint, that need to be made up for. Because of this, weapons that would normally be bullied by E-liter are actually functioning quite fine because E-liter has to interact with them. The fights are being taken largely on the other weapon's terms, and there is a big punishment for not consistently taking out this weapon. Now, whether you think that this is a good or bad way of balancing the problem, it does work. Personally, I'm not a big fan of how much bow and heavy paint the floor right now. But I don't think they've necessarily led to any insanely unhealthy options either. Heavy has not won by enabling a bunch of pure paint spam comps. Same for Tri-Stringer, and same for Pencil. So I think, in terms of this discussion, that's a little bit outside the scope of this video. When it comes to overall backline viability, it is pretty abundantly clear by the data that plenty of options are capable of winning, more than ever before in this game. Okay. So let's move on to passive special spammy playstyles. This goes on 2 fronts, but first I'm going to talk about the counterplay for dealing with E-liter rather than E-liter's own weapon compositions. Because again, in previous games, E-liter encouraged a lot of passive and special focused gameplay, and this is actually something we've seen a little bit. In the tournament SOS1, the E-liter team was beaten by Lobster's team, which was a win for Rapid Blaster Pro. Rapid Pro was being ran with multiple supports. From my memory, I can remember the Zinc Mini Smiling, or not Zinc Mini Smiling, the Zuka Mini Smiling, I honestly don't remember what it's called, and the Dreadringer being used. Running multiple supports into Liter did work out quite well for it, as it gives you access to many specials to close the gap or take the weapon out, which was a big concern I had initially, that this style of play would be a great way at counteracting this weapon. Granted, Rapid Pro is a more fighting established anchor, like I mentioned, so it's not like the comp is extremely passive, but it still seemed very concerning. However, outside of this singular instance, I can't think of another example in which this kind of counterplay was necessary to beat E-liter. Most of the time, the comps that are beating E-liter are just normal compositions. It is lost to standard Tri-Stringer comps, Pencil comps, and even Heavy and Pen has placed over it in recent events. these comps have not had to drastically change the way they're going about it. Similarly, special spam is also not a big problem. Granted, this is mostly because of the game. There just isn't really a lot of great special spam options that deal with chargers. The best example right now is probably Vacuum 96. And while Vacuum 96 is very good, in fact it's the most common support in recent events, and it's clearly going to be something that gets attention later, it also does not hold a candle to how weapons like Kensa Splattershot or NZAP 85 or any of them played. Vac 96 still does interact a good bit. It is still a weapon that has a measurable speed weakness and other issues. That is about as egregious as the special spam against it gets. You can pick multiple supports, and it is good into it, but the idea that you need to play this way isn't true, and in fact it's not even the most common way of dealing with it. For the most part, you can deal with E-Leader running pretty much the same compositions you would run normally. It doesn't really change the game that much. Support is still an option you can spec into, and it does have opportunities where it's shown that it's worked, but I wouldn't say even then it really impacts the game in a major way. At absolute worst, this is a small point against the weapon, but I really don't think it's that significant. Let's talk about weapon compositions. It's really important for good weapons in the game to open up other weapons that can see use, and, not enable unhealthy comps. Maybe the weapons fighting E-Leader aren't that unhealthy, but does E-Leader itself encourage unhealthy weapons? Well, I remember for a while that E-Leader was tried to be ran with coolerless compositions for quite a bit. And this is something we've even seen with Tri-Stringer as well, since Tri-Stringer's original experimentation revolved around a comp like Dreadringer, Roller, and Tenebrella. However, that comp didn't make it very far, and Leaders is largely the same story. Running multiple support options, or running no cooler, did not work out for the weapon. The comp ultimately was just too susceptible to being ran down and taken out, as is the nature with a lot of bad Splatoon 3 comps, and so it didn't work out. E-Leader nowadays sees success with two varying types of compositions. The first is running basically your standard pen composition, but with an E-Leader slotted in. Normally, a pen comp would be a support like Splashomatic, paired with S-Blast and Bucket, though those might be changing a little bit now, and Pencil alongside it. That has often gotten replaced with S-Blast and Bucket being mirrored again, running NZAP, a very slightly different weapon compared to Splashomatic, and then running your E-Leader. Your short-range support shooter now covers the Tacticooler, and the E-Leader plays its long-range defensive playstyle. Why run this composition? Well, to make a long story short, AoE weapons are very good to pair with E-Leader as fighting options for it. The main way to counterplay E-Leader is to hide around walls and ledges. Because of that, it is very effective to have weapons that are capable of fighting there, to, kind of encourage the other team to go stand in spots that Leader can actually affect. So these weapons kind of have some natural synergy. There is, however, another composition that has become more common and is less AoE focused. This was the idea that's won some of the more recent area cups, which is running E-Leader with other short-range slayers instead. Primarily, this includes the options of Roller, Carbon Roller, and Tri-Slosher, which again, is pretty simple to understand. It is a lot of natural synergy between the weapons. Roller is a weapon that wants up-close engagements. If you try to rush down E-Leader, you will play into Roller. And especially, if you counterpick the E-Leader to its worst maps, like Urchin, Flounder, or Humpback, you are going to be taking weapons like Tri-Slosher and Roller to their best stages. To synergize with this, the support has switched to more fighting-focused options that have more mid-range. This is also the general trend as of recent, but Leader comps were doing this beforehand, which mainly has two options. Vacuum 96, which I've already covered, and Forge Splattershot Pro, which has also won an Area Cup and a monthly challenge with a similar composition. Occasionally, the Roller is also slotted out for a normal Slosher, as Tri-Slosher already covers that option and Roller and Tri naturally stack on top of it. Moonlight right now is trying this comp out with regular Roller, but I will note that an Area Cup is specifically one with Carbon Roller over it. Again, this comp makes a lot of sense. In this case, I think it's actually a little bit stronger. You have a bit more fighting power, short-range shooters are kind of a little bit weak right now with all the mid-range fighting weapons that got buffed, and the ability to disincentivize Leader's main counterpicks is a flaw that has to be covered around, and has been something that a lot of Leader comps have been struggling, so this seems like a natural evolution. Rollers, like Carbon Roller and regular Roller, as well as options like Tri-Slosher, also are not that common. Tri has been seen only very recently with Tri-Stringer, but outside of that is very rare. Rollers have also not been doing well for quite some time. So E-Liter is definitely enabling some of these types of weapons. Forge and VAC-96 would be a similar example. Though VAC-96 is working with everything lately, Forge is definitely working better with Leader than it is with most other options. Now, is this enabling of playstyle healthy is a whole other discussion. I do think it encourages some more weapon variety than we're seeing, which is a point in its favor, but people typically don't like fighting rollers or AoE. Now, AoE is kind of present in every composition, so there's only so many points I can knock E-Liter for running the exact same thing, but the other composition is new. If in your head, dealing with more weapon variety is bad because it's dealing with roller and tri-slosher and you don't like dealing with those kind of weapons, then this development is negative. If you just want more weapon variety and are happy to see less mid-range AoE taking over the game, then this development might be positive. However, it does definitely not enable any sort of passive, special spammy, defensive gameplay. That is definitely not something that is happening. Again, I think this point is at worst neutral. You could argue that E-Liter isn't really shaping away from unhealthy compositions and playstyles if you want to be the most cynical. And if you want to be the most optimistic, it gives a little bit more weapon variety while also still enabling some of the same AoE stuff people have been complaining about. Next up, let's talk about weapon kits. This goes for both E-Liter and the options dealing with it. Special balance is very important when it comes to chargers, and Splatoon 2 has been another prime example of how this can be affected if it's done poorly. Let's get the easy part out of the way. E-Liter's weapon kits are pretty healthy for the game. Wavebreaker is a really tough special to find some things to complain about. It can be a little boring, but in this game where all the specials in the game are giant tanking options or giant killing options, having a special that just kind of exists normally and doesn't really do anything very oppressive honestly makes the lobby feel a little bit better than it doesn't. I don't think that's super controversial. Inkmine is a just normal sub that I don't think many people are going to be able to complain about either. The custom E-Liter kit of Beacon and Kraken is probably a little bit more controversial. It's not seen as much, but it did win the least recent Area Cup, and given Kraken is useful into InkVac, I think it warrants a little bit more discussion than before. Beacon, I don't think I have any complaints about, but Kraken is a special people typically don't like, and to be honest, I haven't really enjoyed it very much recently. I defend the special quite a lot, but I do think it's overall more unhealthy than it is not. That said, is E-Liter a big offender in this? Not really. Kraken is not a strong special, and given it doesn't become a strong special, I don't think it's really going to be a big deal. It is very situational, and it is also being paired with the E-Liter, a weapon that is already going to be slow due to being heavyweight when the special is done. A weapon that is going to be far away when it pops its Kraken. That does not want to stop being an E-Liter for 8 seconds, giving the other team the opportunity to cross the map. And that is the by far worst option at fighting after the Kraken runs out. In other words, I don't think E-Liter's kits are very harmful, and if anything, I think they're probably more healthy than a lot of options in the game. They are perfectly normal. For the most part, you will see the Wavebreaker one, and I don't think there's too many complaints to have about it. But what about the specials that it fights against? And, I mean, this kind of just talks about all the other specials in the game, but how do they affect E-Liter specifically? Is there a good back-and-forth dynamic between these specials and the charger itself? Are they relied on too heavily? How exactly does this dynamic work? For me, I think it's safe to say that the special interactions with Leader are fine in this game. A lot of specials are a little bit overtuned big radiuses, think Tri-Strike and Booyah Bomb, and when it comes to Leader, this usually means that it has to get out of the way, unless if it either has a shot on these options, or if there's teammates around that can help you shred them. There are some specials that are a little bit more interesting. Ultra Stamp is something that Leader can shoot through, but also Hammer Throw is very good against it at taking it out due to its extremely overtuned hitbox. Crab Tank is an option that is very difficult for E-Liter to snipe, and in some positions not really possible due to the height changes, as well as has options to displace it and keep the special user safe. Options like Big Bubbler and Ink Vacuum can secure an area in a way that Leader really doesn't have many good options for. It barely does any damage to Ink Vac to the point where we're seeing some Kraken Leader to deal with it, and Bubble Leader also tanks it very effectively. So these HP specials give you a way to lock off areas that would normally be something that leaders would be able to control for free, in a way that I think opens up the game a little bit. It does have some special matchups that it's particularly good into, Reef Slider being one of them, and there are some options that used to be stronger into Leader that have gotten weaker recently, such as Zipcaster or Trizuka, and I think it's totally fair to want specials like that to be buffed so that there are more better options at dealing with it. However, the current specials have plenty of options at moving it out of the way effectively, while not being as oppressive as in the previous games to the point where your game plan revolves around them. to bring up missiles and whale briefly, because someone's going to mention it, Killer Whale and Tenet missiles both have large cooldowns. Whale's power is relatively weak, and Tenet missiles output is relatively low. Both of these things make them significantly weaker options, and mainly, the output on them is so low that you cannot really play around them as a solid game plan to deal with Charger. So no, none of the Splatoon 2 playstyles really exist in this game. This isn't to say that I think E-Leader's interactions with specials is too positive. There would need to be more options like Zuka and Zipcaster that have more interesting dynamic interactions for me to think that. And currently, Crab Tank's really the only thing that fits it to me, to where the back and forth dynamic really feels like it's against E-Leader, but in a way that's still fightable in an interesting way. Watching Crab duel with this weapon is genuinely interesting, but there isn't a whole lot of that right now. That said, I don't think it's offensive either, so like with most things, this is kind of a neutral point. And that means we have just one category left, possibly the most important one. How does leader affect how everyone else plays the game? So, E-Leader does arguably have problems with how it controls open sightlines. The map design, while a lot better than it used to be, still does have a problem of having a lot of areas for Leader to contest, with the overall narrow space making it harder to find cover. This is more an issue with the maps against every backline, but Leader is definitely the one that benefits from this the most. I mean, the sign changes were literally made for Chargers. But what I mainly want to talk about is how teams are playing against E-Leader. And I have watched quite a lot. Moonlight has played pretty much every team with Leader in the Western scene. And I have watched around 5 to 10 Leader Area Cup tournament runs at this point. So I have seen a whole host of options fight it. I feel like I have a good perspective on this. But people can disagree with me, of course. I don't think the way you play against E-Leader really looks that different from normal. You do avoid open sightlines a little more than normal, but realistically, I don't think the game plan changes that much. For the most part, as we've talked about prior, people are running the same compositions. Maybe a little bit more emphasis on options like InkVac as of recently, but really not major comp changes. Running it down and taking space from E-Leader to control ledges under it is still very effective. Yes, there are compositions like rollers or other AoE weapons being ran with it, but it doesn't change that the counterplay can still be effective. People are not perfect, and it's not a foolproof option. Leader still has parts of the game where it has to take risky sightlines or go for difficult shots, because the passive value of whatever it's going against is likely going to be higher if it's not taking enough risks. Many of the weapons in the game do have the ability to bully Leader when they have access to ledges or corners to use line of sight against it. However, all of this pales in comparison to talking about one specific option. Without this option, Leader would undoubtedly be an unhealthy weapon, and I wouldn't have much disagreement with everything else. And that one thing is Tacticooler. I haven't talked about Tacticooler recently. The Tacticooler, compared to the start of the game where it didn't work against Respawn Punisher, pretty much negates the value of kills to a pretty significant degree. You only have a slight penalty from Respawn Punisher that affects you. You still respawn in just a few seconds. You still keep almost the entirety of your special weapon. And Tacticooler is a special that is everywhere, which means teams have an option to run into Leader and play aggressively. This special has been proven to be worth it, if not necessary, into E-Leader compositions, as it greatly helps with the ability to run it down and take risks. This allows you to keep your special to be able to chain it more effectively. This allows you to rush the weapon down and kill it before it can kill multiple of your players. And, you know, do general Tacticooler things that we've seen over the past 3 years. The only real deterrent that Leader has to this is, one, it's still very effective when Tacticooler isn't up, which is largely the same story as all the other options. Passive value is going to be higher, so if you're fighting something like a pencil, you have to contest them, which, you know, is what we've talked about prior. On top of that, though, the other thing that skews the dynamic is Respawn Punisher. If there is one thing I am going to complain about heavily with E-Leader, as I've only lightly critiqued it so far, it is going to be Respawn Punisher. In Splatoon 2, I understand the need for this ability to exist. We had just left a meta where everyone ran quick respawn, and it was broken to a degree where you wouldn't be sure if the nerfs you did were enough. Introducing an ability to make sure QR doesn't take over the game in this circumstance makes sense. I do not think this ability had any reason to be ported over to Splatoon 3 and be unchanged in the spot it's in. Respawn Punisher almost entirely benefits E-liter, and almost no other weapons will ever run it. It is basically a buff to this weapon that gives its kills more value and encourages staying alive more. And if it wasn't for Tacticooler, the way that affects the dynamic of the game would be so incredibly unhealthy, it leads to a bunch of special spam, which is what happened in Splatoon 2. While Respawn Punisher is largely negated due to Tacticooler, there are times you die without Cooler, and even with Cooler, it has an effect. If there is any nerf that should happen to this weapon to increase its overall healthiness, this is by far the most important one. I do not think Respawn Punisher should be in the game. If it is going to be in the game, I think it should be entirely reworked to not encourage passive playstyles. But again, and I've said this before, I generally don't think playstyles that encourage sitting back and staying alive are very healthy for the game. I do not think an ability whose sole purpose it is to increase the amount of time people are not playing the game for both the user and the opponents is a healthy ability design. It is definitely the most unhealthy part about E-liter's entire toolkit. And so yes, I think that's absolutely a problem that should be adjusted. This would nerf the weapon, and I think that would be a fair change to do about it. As of now though, while I really dislike Respawn Punisher, I don't think it drastically affects it to the point where it is extremely unhealthy. Again, mostly because of Tacticooler being in the spot it's in. Everything I say would change if Tacticooler suddenly became a F-tier special that nobody ever saw. But when we're talking about the balance of the game, Tacticooler is a huge part of it, and it affects E-liter possibly more than anything else. Okay, that took a long time, but I wanted to really cover everything. So, with all points talked about, what do I think about Leader? Like, my actual opinion. Personally, I think that there is a big disconnect between how E-liter functioned previously in all 3 Splatoon games versus how E-liter functions now. For the most part, E-liter synergizes with the meta very effectively. It provides an answer to a problem that a lot of backlines get passive value and need ways of being taken out, and solves that problem very effectively. Like with most options in the game, it does not drastically change the game like it used to. People are running largely the same compositions, largely the same strategies, not playing to special very much more than they usually do. Other anchors are still being picked, and that's really the main thing that I feel has changed. Before, an E-liter on the map drastically changed what had to be run and what strategies had to be changed. And while E-liter does still have some effect on it, over time, it's become abundantly clear that that effect is pretty minimal. Does E-liter have its annoying moments where it kills you because of lag in this game? Absolutely. Does it have some ridiculous shots and maps where it feels very oppressive on, like Yelltail and Crableg? For sure. My argument here isn't that E-liter is necessarily a healthy weapon. To be frank, I have a hard time calling most weapons in the game that are in the anchor category healthy, especially one like E-liter. Pencil's probably the best candidate for that still, which is something I know a lot of people might not agree with, but it's largely inoffensive at these days. For the most part, E-liter just doesn't warp the game around it in an unhealthy way like it used to. It still does have effects that are annoying and irritating, some that should probably be tweaked in an ideal world, but I don't think it's this standout problem ruining the game. I don't think it's drastically changing how things are being played. And again, this isn't me saying my opinion of Leader is necessarily positive. I think E-liter in this game is fine. Maybe that's a boring stance to take, but that's where I think it is. I don't think it's necessarily a big problem, nor a big positive. If you care about variety in the game, it adds to that and it makes it interesting. If you like seeing chargers, it does that. If you don't like chargers and don't like the things Leader enables, you're not going to like it. My overall point being, if nothing else, that E-liter, how it is right now, is not the same how E-liter used to be. And when the weapon's being discussed, I feel like it should be a relevant point that a lot of the discussion around it seems to be how E-liter used to be, and not how E-liter commonly is right now. So yeah, all that talk just to say that E-liter is kind of neutral and that I think they should remove Respawn Punisher. But I hope I was able to go in depth with my reasoning. That said, this isn't actually the end of the video. I want to talk about a topic correlated to E-liter here that I think might shed a little bit more light on this debate. I want to talk about a weapon that has not gotten enough discussion lately for how interesting of a spot it is in right now. I want you to go back in time to Splatoon 2 real quick, and tell people in that game that normal Charger in Splatoon 3 would be down 20 points for special, or in some cases 30 points for special, compared to the 220 that it's at right now. In addition to that, options like ink armor and missiles are removed, if not entirely nerfed, some of the weapon's worst counters. And on top of that, it has some of the best kits in the game. 3 really good weapon kits, all with a good sub and special combination. Practically everyone in the past hearing that would assume that Splat Charger would have to be one of the best weapons in the game. And Splat Charger is so rarely seen, I don't think it's ever talked about. What you're looking at now is one of the very few exceptions in Rainmaker for Charger players who play E-Liter because it has an ink vacuum. This right now is Splat Charger's pretty much only use case. I have seen E-Liter be used on Urchin Underpass over picking an option like Firefin. We have a Charger with a crab, a strike, a vacuum, a bomb, a wall, and a sprinkler. And none of them see much use at all. In Splatoon 2, Charger's oppressiveness wasn't a talk just for E-Liter. If anything, it is applied to Splat Charger more than that, even if granted it was largely because of weapon kits. But again, the weapon kits, while not as oppressive as in Splatoon 2, are incredibly good for Charger. So it's gotten me thinking for a while, what on earth is up with Charger to where it doesn't see use? And I think the interesting part is it's for the reasons that are affecting E-Liter in its same spot. Remember how I've just mentioned that other backlines typically have to fight in ways to where, the other weapon has to take initiative against it. They get more passive value, like Heavy and, like Heavy and Tri-Stringer, and all of them being able to paint, and Pencil, right? E-Liter's extra range gives it a lot better of a use case to contest it. Splat Charger has comparable, if not slightly less range than options like Pencil and Tri-Stringer, and it also has less range to work around when it comes to Heavy. Splat Charger is put in largely the same dynamic E-Liter is. It has to find kills and control open sight lines in order to be worth picking. But in Splat Charger's case, at least from what we've seen so far, it just can't do it. Outside of extremely niche use cases, the weapon doesn't see the light of day because it cannot accomplish that task as well as E-Liter can. And it's largely because of the slight range disadvantage. And you would really think that having 3 weapon kits that are all better than E-Liter would surely give it some way to help with this problem, especially given that all of them are cheaper. But none of them do. And I find that really interesting. The way we talk about E-Liter and Splat Charger is now so different, despite the main weapons themselves being practically identical to the way they were in previous games. The same dynamic that's largely affected E-Liter in a positive way, by forcing it to take more initiative and giving ways of other backlines to contest it, has not affected Splat Charger in the same light. Moreover, when I talked to Basil a little bit about how to potentially buff this weapon, neither of us could really come up with a good answer. The buffs would either be way too much, or too little to the point where the exact same dynamic would still exist, and you should just pick E-Liter. If E-Liter was nerfed, it wouldn't change anything either, as this isn't worth it how it is now. Charger is in a very interesting balance dynamic, where it seems to just kind of be stuck. The passive options just have too much of a way to stay away from it, while the killing options just seem better at forcing their kills over this weapon's ability to control that kind of space. And again, there are occasional use cases, like Rainmaker here, so Charger players can have an ink vac, but it's pretty minimal. I'm honestly kind of curious how you would fix this problem, and I think it's an interesting look into a weapon that is so similar to E-Liter, and has largely had the same story, but has diverged in a really interesting way. How do you fix both of these weapons at the same time? Anyway, that is actually it from me. I know this was a very long second channel video, but I wanted to make sure I really had to say about everything I could. I'm sure there is still something I'm missing here, and I hope my analysis has been overly thorough on everything here. I'm definitely open to seeing more discussion and seeing if there's any points I missed, though. But for the most part, that's it. Thanks for tuning in to what might be my longest second channel discussion that isn't a tier list. And that'll be it. Normally I play the rest of this game, but it's Rainmaker. I think you can guess how this one ends.